Hello everyone, my name is Joseph Hwang. I'm currently a senior at Bergen County Academies, and this is our first lesson where we're going to be diving into economics. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and I hope that we can have a great experience in our journey together. This is the course guideline. So today we're going to be going into the foundation of economics, and then we're going to be starting the microeconomics piece. We're going to be covering a variety of topics, for example, the introduction to demand and supply, competitive markets, elasticities, government intervention, market failure, production, costs, revenues, profits, and market structures. These are only a few topics of microeconomics, so there's a lot to be covered. For example, we will go into things like monopolies, oligopolies, perfect competition, etc. As for the purpose of today's lesson, we're going to be going into things such as what exactly economics is, why economics and how economists make economic models, how economics is a social science, and other things just to create a foundation. So we're going to be starting off with answering this particular question. What is economics? And here I'm going to be assuming that there is no knowledge on this topic. So I'm going to be going off of where economics came from. And it came from the Greek term, which you can see here. And this phrase means one who manages and administers all matters relating to a household. So back in history, it would be someone like this clip art image here. Someone who has all the plans and of all the daily activities that need to be carried out. Over time, this expression evolved to mean careful management of society's scarce resources to prevent waste. And this is a pretty interesting definition of economics. For example, if you go on Google, economics may be defined as the study of the relationship between consumers and businesses in a market. But the reason why this particular definition of economics is most accurate is because it represents the general trend and defining factor of what makes an economy an economy. So just in general, everyone wants something, right? If you're a kid, you wanted that particular toy. This could be Legos, a particular gaming console. And as you grow older, your wants expand. For example, once you get your driver's license, you want to have a car, and when you get older, you might even want a house. So all of these goods and services and all of these products require resources, right? And in economics, we define resources as things that are used to make goods and services that people want. So resources can include many things. As we can see on the slide, these include machines, metals, and raw materials. And what's interesting is that some goods and services may actually be resources that are used to make others. For example, let's say a screwdriver. A screwdriver can actually be used, it is a good, however, it can be used as a resource to make other greater goods, such as cars or bigger machines, which can then in turn be used to make other goods and services. So it's important to note that there is a connection between resources and goods. In economics, however, we don't really use the word resources. A more common term for resources is factors of production, which I'll be going into deeper in the next following slide. And these are basically just factors during the production process of making a good. But before we go into the factors of production, we have to kind of identify the problem of resources, and that is scarcity. So as we can see in the slide, resources are not present in unlimited amounts. There are not an unlimited amount of minerals or metals such as aluminum, and there are not an unlimited amount of movie tickets. And so what this means is that there is not enough of a particular resource to satisfy everyone's needs. And in economics, resources are scarce because there is not enough to satisfy every want. And so this will be more important as we see in the following slides. And it's important to note that scarcity is a very underlying concept in economics. And so now we can see issues with scarcity. So if there are scarce resources or factors of production, people cannot have everything. And this forces people, governments, and even businesses to choose. And what exactly do we mean by this? So let's say, just from a consumer standpoint, if you have $100 and let's just assume that ice cream costs $100 and a clock costs $100. Because you only have $100, you can only buy one of the two goods. So you don't have enough resources to buy all the goods that you want. And so this is obviously a very simple example. However, on larger scale things such as making cars, not every consumer will be able to have a car because there are not enough resources to build enough. So now we have a definition of economics. It's a pretty bare bone definition. However, it is the study of choices that lead to the best possible use of scarce resources. And now we can move on to what are the factors of production. So as we saw before, factors of production are another term for resources. And so we have 4 different factors of production. The first is land. Land is also categorized as natural resources. These include everything that is under or above the land, such as minerals, oil reserves, underground water, forests, etc. And economists often refer to land as gifts of nature because these are things that are naturally granted that the economy can use to make goods and services. Second factor of production is labor. Labor is the physical and mental effort that people contribute and kind of kind of give out to the production of a good and service. So, for example, we can think of the efforts of a teacher or a construction worker or an economist or a doctor, taxi driver, any job. This labor helps contribute to deliver a service or to make a good. So you can see in this image here, we see construction workers working to build a building. The third factor of production is capital. Capital is any man-made item that helps production. And in this instance, we're going to be talking about physical capital. Examples of physical capital include machinery, tools, factories, buildings, road systems, airports, etc. And you can see in this particular image, the capital are kind of machine lines, right? Machines that help transfer goods and make production more efficient. The last factor of production is entrepreneurship. These are skills of innovation, risk-taking, management. And entrepreneurship is probably the most interesting factor of production because it's often the one that is forgotten. These are any special human skill that is possessed by a particular group. And entrepreneurship is good because it organizes the other 3 factors of production and takes on the risk of success or failure in a business. And one important thing to note, which will connect with the next slide, is that the third factor of production, capital, can actually be separated even further into 4 subcategories, which we'll be seeing right now. So breaking down capital. So the first subcategory of capital is physical capital. These are man-made, tangible things. As we saw before, physical capital was the general capital that we were talking about, machines. And what's important about physical capital is that it helps improve efficiency. It helps make production more quick so that we can produce more goods and services. The second is human capital. Human capital refers to abilities, knowledge, skills, any of these that are acquired by people, as well as levels of health, all of which make people more productive when producing a product or service. Human capital provides a large amount of future benefits because it increases the amount of output that can be produced in the future, right? So let's say if someone is well educated, they may have more ideas and for producing goods at an even larger volume for the future. The next category of capital is natural capital, and this includes anything. It's also known as environmental capital. It refers to an expanded meaning of the previous factor of production, which was land. It includes everything that is on the land plus additional resources or natural resources that occur, and these include air, biodiversity, soil quality, ozone, etc. And the last type of capital is financial capital. This is probably a very interesting category of capital because it refers to investments and financial instruments. And what exactly are financial instruments? It's just a fancy word for stocks or bonds, and it's a measure of money, essentially, for consumers or businesses. So now we're going to be moving on to probably one of the most important and common economic concepts, which is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is just by its definition is the value of the next best alternative that must be sacrificed to obtain something else. And so what exactly does this mean? So let's take a look at an example. Let's say you and your friend have $100 and you don't know what you want to spend $100 on. And after a lot of thinking and a lot of talking, you guys finally narrow it down to two things, a PS4 or an Xbox. So what is the opportunity cost in this situation? Well, if you chose to purchase the Xbox, that means the PS4 was the next best alternative. And so the opportunity cost is the value of the PS4. However, if you chose the PS4, the Xbox would be the next best alternative. And so the opportunity cost in that situation would be the value of the Xbox, which is given up. And so in a larger scale, businesses have experienced opportunity cost a lot. For example, businesses have to allocate their resources to produce a certain type of good. And depending on what type of good they choose to produce, there's a very large opportunity cost because they're using their resources, which are scarce, as we just learned before, to produce something else rather than another product. So now we're going to be going into even more examples just to make sure that we really understand what the opportunity cost here is. So I'm going to read each of these examples, and I'm going to give a brief pause just for you guys to identify what you think the opportunity cost is, and then we're going to reveal the actual opportunity cost of each example. So the first example, someone gives up going to see a movie to study for a test in order to get a good grade. What is the opportunity cost? We can see that the opportunity cost is the cost of the movie and the enjoyment of seeing it. And this is pretty obvious here because we see that the next best alternative besides studying for the test in this particular situation was going to see the movie. So the value of the movie, which is the next best alternative, would be the opportunity cost. Now the second example. At the ice cream parlor, you have to choose between Rocky Road and Strawberry. This opportunity cost here there's like two answers, so if you choose either one of them, then you will be correct. So opportunity cost, let's say if you chose Rocky Road instead of Strawberry, is the enjoyment of Strawberry, because if you chose Rocky Road, Strawberry would be the next best alternative. However, if you chose Strawberry instead of Rocky Road would be the next best alternative, and hence the value of Rocky Road would be the opportunity cost. Finally, the last example. A player attends baseball training to be a better player instead of taking a vacation. What is the opportunity cost? The opportunity cost was the vacation. This one's a pretty simple example here. As we see, the next best alternative instead of training was to going on vacation. Hence, vacation is the next best alternative. So now we move on to another very important fundamental economic concept, which is the production possibilities curve. The production possibilities curve is often noted or abbreviated as the PPC, It displays all possible combinations of the production of two goods in an economy. In a very large sense, these two goods are capital goods or normal goods, which will be explored way later on in the lessons. But just for this example of just defining the production possibilities curve, we're going to be looking at the example of guns and butter, which can be seen on the axes. The y-axis is labeled quantity of guns produced, and the x-axis is labeled the quantity of butter produced. But before we analyze the actual curve and the graph, there are two important assumptions that we have to take note of. The first is that there is full employment. What does this mean? When we say full employment, we are talking about resources. We are saying that all resources are fully employed, because if there was an employment of some resources, in which case they were being sitting unused, the economy would not be producing the maximum it can produce. And this would defeat the purpose of the production possibilities curve, as this curve specifically shows the combinations of the maximum amount that can be produced of two goods. The second is all resources must be used efficiently, and that is exactly what productive efficiency means. So the term efficiency in a general sense means that resources are being used in the best possible way to avoid waste. So productive efficiency means that the goods are produced by using the fewest possible resources, and by doing so, we are able to produce the most amount of goods possible in the economy. So now we're going to move on to the actual analysis of the curve itself, just to kind of create a better understanding of what the PPC actually is. So we see a lot of points on this example of guns versus butter, and the points B, D, and C share a common theme, and that is that they are all on the actual curve itself, the blue curve here. And what these points represent is the full employment of resources and productive efficiency. So if you're on the curve, if you have a point on the curve, these points are upholding the two assumptions that we just talked about. If you move on to point A represents that resources are not fully employed. The economy is not maximizing itself. So therefore, point A is representing that one of the assumptions is not upheld, and that the PPC is not true. It's not being properly displayed, essentially. Point X is interesting because point X is beyond the PPC. So this represents something that cannot be obtained with the current state of the economy. So what point X kind of represents is something that an economy might be working towards. For example, an economy may be able to expand its production possibilities curve by research and development, finding more efficient ways to produce goods, and this will allow the economy to produce a higher quantity of goods and therefore allow itself to expand and reach point X. And now we kind of go on to a more general concept, which is that economics is a social science. So what is a social science? Social sciences basically study the relationship between human society and social relationships, and economics studies the human society and behavior. More specifically, aspects concerned with how people organize their activities and how they behave to satisfy their needs and wants. And the reason why this is a social science can be seen when economists try to explain why things occur in an economy. And the reason why economists do this is because it allows them to come up with explanations for past events, but not only that, it allows them to make predictions for future events. And so there's a pretty thought-out process that economists follow generally to actually analyze why things occur in an economy. And this is known as the social scientific method. It has 6 steps. The first is just making observations of the world, and the world in this case would be the economy, and identifying what particular question the economist is trying to answer. So let's say, just in its general sense, let's say in a town, more consumers buy oranges than apples. So the question we're trying to answer here is, why are oranges selling better than apples in this particular town. The second step of this social scientific method is to outline factors that are important to answering the question. So in this, these factors can take a very large variety of things. So let's go back to the example of a town that has more oranges selling than apples. So a particular factor that can be identified here is the price of the apple compared to the price of the orange, or the amount of income that each household gets. So the third step is to analyze how the factors are related to each other. And when the economists analyzed how the factors are related to each other, they're making a hypothesis. The fourth step is to make assumptions. And an assumption is a statement that economists suppose to be true for the purposes of building that particular hypothesis. So, for example, in the example of oranges selling more than apples, we assume that the price of oranges is the only variable that influences the quantity of oranges that are sold in the town, while all other variables that could have influenced the consumers or households' buying choices do not play a role. And what this does is that it allows us to test the hypothesis, which brings us to step 5. So if we are able to test the hypothesis, we're able to see if this hypothesis actually connects to the real world. And by doing that, we can now go to step 6, where we compare the predictions of the hypothesis with the real world outcomes. And so if the data does not fit the predictions of the hypothesis is rejected, and then the economists search for a new hypothesis. And so now, what's the end goal of this lengthy process, right? Why do economists do this? And the main goal of doing this is that they want to make economic models. They want to gain knowledge about the world through the formulation of hypotheses and theories and laws, and they do this to make models, right? Because models allow economists, it kind of serves as a backbone when they see issues and allows for more accurate predictions of the future of an economy. So now we're going to move on to 2 key assumptions in economic models. This kind of relates back to the production possibilities curve that we just talked about a few slides before. And we saw that in order for the PPC to be true, there were 2 underlying assumptions. Well, just in general in economics, there are also 2 key assumptions that economists take note of when making economic models. The first is ceteris paribus. This directly translates to other things equal, and the reason why economists take note of this is because it helps them analyze a specific factor. So when we saw the production possibilities curve example, we relied on the assumption of full employment and productive efficiency. So we relied on the fact, or we assumed that productive efficiency and full employment is constant in the economy. So if we didn't make these assumptions and we didn't use ceteris paribus in this example, then the PPC would not be true. A more simpler example would be, consider that there's an Xbox that costs $100 and you're trying to analyze the role of price on the consumer's buying decision. So in general, if the price drops, the consumer may want to buy the Xbox more as it's cheaper. However, there are so many different factors that can influence the consumer's choice. For example, maybe the consumer has more money to spend, so the price of $100 does not really affect the consumer. So it's important to take note of ceteris paribus, because by making all other factors equal, economists are able to analyze a particular factor and get a very valuable conclusion out of their study. The second key assumption is self-interest. And this is also very interesting and important because economists assume that everyone acts for themselves. Every buying decision is made to maximize self-satisfaction, and This is very important as it helps create a general trend and a general pattern when analyzing the economy. Now we're going to move on to how economists describe economics. So this is basically analyzing even further the ways that the economists make economic models. So there are basically two different statements. The first, as we can see on the slide, is positive statements. Positive statements, in a general case, are facts, and they describe something in the economy, such as the unemployment rate, the inflation rate. However, it's also important to note that positive statements talk about cause and effect relationships, and cause and effect relationships are not necessarily facts. In a general case, positive statements can be identified with something is blank, and for the cause and effective relationship aspect of positive statements, it's often associated with if A, then B. The second way that economists describe economics and make economic models is through normative statements. Normative statements state what should happen, and they are not necessarily facts, and often they aren't facts at all. They are often suggestions or opinions that economists make after analyzing very long trends in an economy, and these are subjective statements that are determined. Normative statements are often associated with the phrase should be. And what's interesting about normative statements is that they're very valuable to governments because normative statements can help identify issues, and governments can identify what problems they may want to tackle in order to move the economy in a better direction. So now we're going to be looking into some examples of positive and normative statements. In each example, I'm going to be giving a brief pause after I reach the statement to give you guys some time to answer whether it is a positive or normative statement. So let's begin with the first example. The unemployment rate is increasing. Positive or normative? This is a positive statement. And the reason is because it is a fact. And it is not a suggestion or an opinion. It is stating something that is seen in the economy. The second example is healthcare should be available to everyone free of charge. Positive or normative? This is a normative statement, and the reason is because we see the phrase should be. The economist who made this statement is giving a suggestion and possibly even highlighting a problem that the government may want to address in the future. The next we have here is extreme poverty should be eliminated. Positive or normative? This is also a normative statement. For the same reason above, it has the phrase should be, and although it is generally agreed upon that poverty is very detrimental to society and to the economy, it is still a suggestion and, once again, may highlight an issue that the government wants to focus on in the future. The last example is if consumers stop purchasing cigarettes, lung cancer cases will decrease. Positive or normative? This is a positive statement. The reason why it's a positive statement, and it's important to note that it is because it's not necessarily a suggestion or an opinion. Although it's not necessarily true that if consumers stop purchasing cigarettes, lung cancer cases will decrease, it still goes under the categorization of positive statements because it displays a cause and effect relationship. So it's important to note, especially when identifying cause and effect relationships, that although you may believe that it's not necessarily true, it does not categorize it as a normative statement. Now, just to wrap up the lesson, it's important to note here that economics is studied at two levels. Right now, all we did was just look at the foundational, trying to create a foundation of economics to dive even further. And the first level is microeconomics. It's an analysis of the behavior of individual peoples in an economy. Individual peoples who we're talking about are households, consumers, and firms or businesses. It even may include the government in some cases. So basically, microeconomics is just an interaction between individual groups. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, is economics on a larger scale. It's the broad overall image. It's analysis of all firms in the economy, all consumers in the economy, the production of all goods and services. So we see here, general trend is that it's basically encompassing everything. And for this course, we're just going to be diving into the microeconomics part, basically just looking at interactions between firms and consumers and the government, and we're not going to be going into the macroeconomics piece of economics. That wraps us up with our first lesson. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that I see you in the next lesson.